Morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning as we present our AISTS 2020 Masters Class presentation in collaborations with the ITA in the development of a clean sport education plan. For the reason that we are all here in this room is for our love and our passion and commitment to sport. And that's what we're doing in collaboration with ITA, and addressing the elephant in the room by how we take on the fight against anti-doping and making sure there's a clean sport for all. To understand how you can really engage, I first want to introduce you to my team. In a collection of minds of individuals from the professional world of sport, to sport development, to our own medical professional and people who would experience within this major sporting events, we come with a broad and diverse view of not just sport, but anti-doping and how we can all, as stakeholders within this environment, play a role in moving sport forward. We also want to take this time to acknowledge those that have contributed to this amazing project. Of course, to the ITA and our education manager, Olia Abasolo, to all the international federations that have been able to play a contribution into this project, the Luzon 2020 Youth Olympic Games, which allowed us the opportunity to gain some perspective from our athletes, and of course, our head of research and education here, Dr. Maggie Lewis. Huge shout out again to all of the international federations and our One NATO for their representation in this project. To understand where we're starting off, we first must know the baseline for where we start. And back in 2014, the Olympic Agenda Recommendation 15 called for a need for the protection of sport. That started the creation of the ITA as an independent sanctioning body that operates within the sporting ecosystem. Since then, we've established that there has to be something that needs to be done to take this sport to a whole new level in how we actually approach anti-doping. It starts with education. According to the World Anti-Doping Code, that should be the first opportunity for athletes to be introduced to the world of anti-doping. We must first educate them. But there's necessary needs that we all must take, again, as stakeholders in this engaging battle. To understand that, our group has been assigned with some key tasks of first understanding the landscape of currently what is going on within the world of anti-doping, current practices, and what are the needs that needs to be addressed amongst ITA and federations, establishing a set of recommendations and templates that can be used, and formulating a plan and implementation to move forward in making sure that education is a key component from the ITA and international sporting organizations. To get a better understanding of our baseline of our research, I hand it over to Dr. Armando Obin, who will give you more information.
Thank you, Miguel. So when we talk about anti-doping education, we usually hear that education is the most important thing for medical commissions, international federations, also to organizing committees. But from previous research, we know that this is not reality. We know that the main focus has been directed into detection and deterrence methods. So one of the main challenges around anti-doping education is that there's no standardized data on what is being done out there. We know for sure how many tests are taken on a daily basis, yes. We know how many anti-doping rule violations and sanctions are made, yes. But when it comes to anti-doping education, we don't have any clear example of what a good practice looks like. So another main challenge is that anti-doping education means so many different things to so many different people around the world. So this makes even more confusing to the people working around anti-doping. So in 2019, the World Anti-Doping Agency decided to develop the International Standards for Education. This document will be a mandatory requirement for all signatories of the World Anti-Doping Code and will become effective next January 1st of 2021. One of the main principles of the international standard is that the athletes' first experience with anti-doping should be through education rather than the doping control. Another main principle is the cooperation between international federations and anti-doping organizations. Why? To avoid duplication of efforts and to have a better communication channel between these main two deliverers of education. Also, the inclusion of a values-based education in all anti-doping programs. And finally, the concept of educators educating. We want the right people to deliver the right message at the right time. All of this framework was based to support the planning, the implementation, the monitoring, and the evaluation of effective anti-doping education programs, but also to provide the right terminology to the people working in the anti-doping world. And finally, in this document is also included the definition of what we are here, anti-doping education. So the definition of anti-doping education, according to WADA, is the process of learning to instill values and behaviors that protect the spirit of sport, but also to prevent intentional and unintentional doping. So I will pass the floor to Alex so he can tell us on what we did to achieve our goal.
So for the methodology of this project, we use a mixed methodology approach with where three stages we're taking, focus on the three main pillars that we focus on, and we just didn't want to get data, but the most valuable data in order for us to create observations or recommendations. We based, of course, in ITA, our client, and what we believe is the best platform in order to implement those education plans and programs to educate athletes. The Lausanne 2020 Youth Olympic Games athletes, they are, at the end of the day, the final recipients of these education plans, and most of the times are the ones who are getting tested, not in every single sport, like equestrian, for example. But we believe that those are one of the main stakeholders that we thought of gathering information out of in order to create our observations and recommendations. And last but not least, international federations. ITA cannot really reach every single major sport event that the international federations are hosting. So sometimes they have to delegate and to let them implement some of their own education plans and tools that they're already using. But let's break it down one by one. During Lausanne 2020 Youth Olympic Games, we were able to reach to the athletes that participated in the Real Sport Lab workshop that ITA implemented during this sport event. This was a event like an anti-doping education event. But we, after the event, we were able to ask and use a Likert scale for our quantitative data in order to understand how much they enjoy it, the content, the engagement, etc. This survey was based on 5 closed questions and 1 open one where they were able to really share their observations, feelings, how they felt about the actual workshop, etc. Our target group again was youth athletes. Around 1,800 athletes participated during the Lausanne 2020. We were trying and aiming to reach the 320 responses to get the 95% in order to have a scientific backup. However, we didn't reach this number. We just had 203 responses, which gave us as well some observations to start the project. It was one of the limitations that we actually faced. Moving into the international federations and AISTS interviews, we used a semi-structured interview for qualitative data gathering. These international federations were willing to give us some information, some inside information of what they are right now currently doing. And we wanted to have more of a context and an insight of what the international federations and anti-doping organizations are doing in the context of sport as well. The existing approaches and the actions by the international federations, the engagement and the content tools that they're using, as well as the existing partnership with ITA. We have to give again a huge shout out to Ms. Oleva Solo and Dr. Michael Luis for your context, because for us it was really important not just to talk to somebody from one person who worked in an IF, but the actual person who could give us valuable information in order for us to gather the information that we wanted to make the observations. As we all know, sports, maybe anti-doping doesn't take much of a part on an international federation, even though it's a really important aspect of it. So we really wanted to talk to the right person every single time. Last but not least, ITA SWOT analysis. Of course, we wanted to contextualize and understand the landscape and where ITA is standing right now in the sports context. We of course wanted to understand where we at, know where we want to be in order to draw the path to implement those education plans that we talked about, and of course increase the opportunities and strengths and decrease as much as we can the threats and weaknesses as well. But right now that we know the what and how, I would like to hand out to my colleague David, that is going to explain about the actual results.
Thank you, Alex. As Alex just mentioned in the previous section, our results are based on the ITA SWOT analysis in the current world of anti-doping education, and also the survey during YOG 2020. And the interview we did was 12 IFs. So we're starting with the SWOT analysis of ITA's potential role in the future anti-doping education. And here we listed some of the key points of our analysis. And generally speaking, we really consider that ITA has a strong connection with the stakeholders in the sport community, which includes IFs and MEOs that can provide ITA a huge advantage in the future for the future development of anti-doping education. On the other hand, we have to admit the fact that the complexity of the current anti-doping education and also the many differences between the stakeholders. For the further part of the results, we're using the quantitative and qualitative data we gathered from the survey and also the interviews to have a more general picture of the current landscape in anti-doping education. So next, we're introducing the results from the YOC 2020, and as you can see, from the 5 closed questions, we received really positive feedback from the athletes, which for all the 5 questions, the positive responses are over 70%, which suggests the event-based workshop is a really successful move by ITA. However, we have to, as Alex has mentioned, the total number of the survey received is one of the limitations, and also the event-based workshop is only one of the many education activities in current days. So we are moving on to the next step of the IF interviews to have a more general picture of the, to have a general landscape. And this is one of the examples that we're trying to illustrate, as the team is really keen to know about the main communication channel and information exchange mechanism between the IFs and the athletes. We are using this descriptive data from the 12 interviews to showcase the main communication channels between the IFs and athletes. And here we identify the main communication channels from the most used ones to the least used ones. And the trends we identified here is that during an event, there's a really strong communication and also a good exchange of information between athletes and IFs. However, after events, the only channel between the athletes and IFs could be the digital channels, which include social media. However, there's not much of information regarding the anti-doping education content in social media, which we further created certain recommendations by these digital channels in order to have a better flow of information for the anti-doping education. For the last part of the results, we're introducing the 5 of the main barriers that we identified by this interview. These 5 barriers were identified by at least 6 of the 12 IFs, which represents a majority of the IFs that encountered this problem during their existing education programs. These 5 barriers are lack of athlete lack of engagement, little human resources of education team, lack of cooperation with NATOs, limited budget, and also the language of the content is limited. Although some of the barriers seems not to be easy to overcome, barriers like athletes' lack of engagement and also lack of cooperation with NATOs can be overcome by certain kind of measures. And now we'll pass the floor to Mikkel to talk about the recommendations we created to overcome these barriers and trying to improve the trends we identified.
Thank you so much, David. So like you already established, there had to be a need for us to evaluate what is currently happening in the world of anti-doping. That's vital for us to get a clear representation of what are the current barriers, struggles, and the needs of not only the IFs, the athletes, and major sporting events, trying to get as much of a robust picture as possible. Once we understand what is currently happening, our desire is to identify the trends, the codes that were happening from our conversation after we've done the analysis, and I'll take that information and move that forward. We've identified 3 main pillars for developing our major plan. Activate the athletes, the audience, the educators. Educate the athletes and our educators. And finding a way to develop a strategy to communicate all of that. These are the main pillars to address the main weaknesses that the ITA has a responsibility and a role to actually play while staying within the proper context. Activate. There is no one during this COVID-19 period that has not been affected by this pandemic. And we've also seen that every sporting event has had to make a move into the digital presence. That has been true before, and we were just able to exemplify that purpose now. With our set of digital recommendations, we were able to create a strategy for us not only to engage as part of the communication strategy, but also creating ways to educate through digital recommendations, formulating different contributions from the website's improvement, moving certain things in a clear place where it's less clicks in order to get the information that you actually need, turning it from less text to more videos, because research shows that more people are inclined to watch something than they are to read something. Turning it into also to digital evaluations and KPIs, social media engagement, views, likes, shares, is an opportunity for us to get a return on investment and see how we're actually moving in our realm of digital engagement. Webinars, which are an opportunity to educate and interact with the audience and the athletes, and also have a way to get you a sense of ROI and KPIs. This moves into, again, the digital education, where our focus is to develop workshops and resources, seminars for educators, value-based education programs, which has to be individual based off each individual federation in collaboration with the ITA, and guidelines and toolkits, which again has the ability to be specific for each group event that we will have the opportunity to operate. And that allows us to, again, strengthen the network. There has to be communication amongst those who are educating. There has to be some sort of linkage between what information is being shared. Athletes can sometimes visit the same seminar 4, 5, 6 times, and there's no way that anyone is keeping track of these things. That will also allow us to keep these athletes engaged and inclusive and part of the experience, allowing them not only to participate as a viewer of education, but also an activated form of being an educator. Allows their voice to feel like it's utilized, but also better received by the athletes themselves. And again, strengthening those relationships between the NADOs and the IFs, and collaborating that with major sporting events to build engagement. This robust image, again, is an opportunity for us to set up our guidelines, in which we've been able to present before you guys today in the ITA Clean Sport Education Plan.
Perfect. As a conclusion, we would like, as a team, to acknowledge the fact that we understand that it's almost pragmatically impossible to create an education plan that fits every single one of international federations. That's why we, for our recommendation and observations, we created a set of baselines and templates and guidelines for ITA to adapt to every single sport. It's not the same sport event, summer events, summer sports, winter sports, individual sports, or group or team sports. Not the same. The substances are prevalent on the athletes of different sports, as well as the problems with whereabouts and TUIs and all that in different topics and situations. However, we believe that ITA is in a great position to create this positive change into reaching the sport clean that we are aiming for here. We believe that with our observations and recommendations, it's a little piece of the puzzle to actually create the positive change into the sports world, and we're looking forward. Thank you so much, and we're open to any of your questions. Thank you.